Date and UIDatePicker. Our project, the name of our project will be DatePicker. It's a single view application. That's it. I'll save it to my desktop. Okay. The first thing we'll work on for our date picker is the UI. What does the UI look like? We'll work on the UI part of it first. For your assessment as well, it might be best practice for now to work on the UI of the app first before you work on the data part, right? When I say the UI, you set up storyboard. What does storyboard look like? Later, it might be more essential or more important to get the data first before you get to the UI, right? Based on that project, okay? But for our Unit 2 assessment, I would work on the UI first, right? And then get to the code part of the application. Is that clear for everybody? Okay, cool. First off, let's embed our first view controller in a navigation controller. So embed your view controller in a navigation controller. Sering, how do we embed the view controller in a navigation controller? We click on the current view controller. Everybody, right? We click on the current view controller. And what else? So I click on where my constraints area is, right? I click on the embed button. Do we see the embed button? Right? When I say embed, we should quickly know we go into the embed button, right? Either we embed it in a navigation controller or we embed it in a tab bar controller. That's the view controller could go in either a navigation controller or a tab bar controller. Our app will be a navigation controller. It won't have multiple tabs, okay? Tab bar controller is for multiple tabs, similar to Instagram, similar to the clock app, right? Where we have the tabs at the bottom. All right, so here we'll embed in a navigation controller. Cool. We'll give our first view controller a title. I'll call it create event. So I'll give my view controller a title in the navigation bar. I'll call it create event. So we click on the navigation bar. It brings up the attributes inspector. In there, we edit the title, right? So this is, I'm editing the title of my view controller, not the navigation controller, right? So the view controller, I'm clicking on the bar, and where the attributes inspector is, in the title, I put in create event, create space event. So create event, enter. I'll run my application to verify that my UI has been updated, right? Run frequently, right? So run your application and verify that you do have an app that loads with a navigation bar and the title says create event. So here my simulator is running. And I have a create event in my nav bar. Everybody got a create event in the nav bar? Great. So we know that now. We've done that a couple times now. Any questions so far of what we've done? Yes, sir. It's up to you. It's up to you and the designer if you want large titles or not. It's not a requirement. Yeah, you could have it. So Christian's question was, can we restrict the large titles to a specific view controller? Yes, we can, right? But we have to begin by telling the navigation controller, we have to toggle prefers large titles. Then we could toggle if it's on, always, or automatic. Or if we do not want it at all. Cool? All right. And if you want to do that, you have to click on the navigation bar for the navigation. You have to click on the navigation bar for the navigation controller in order to get to the prefers large titles. And this is the option here, prefers large titles. That's if you want the large titles. Everybody with me? So if you want the large titles, you would click on prefers large titles here, right? And if Xcode is having a good morning, it's going to automatically appear. If not, you might have to toggle on and off where it says translucent. Does it come up for everybody? All right, great. So this is the prefers large titles. This is the introduced in iOS 11. We have a large titles bar here. Great. So let's continue on with our UI. Next up, let's drag in a second view controller. So drag in a second view controller. How am I dragging in a second view controller, Tiffany? I go to the library and I type in view, C-O-N, controller comes up. I select view controller. I drag view controller into my canvas. Great. So right now we have a navigation controller and we have two view controllers. Currently our second view controller is not connected. So let's work on the UI. Let's work on the UI for our first view controller. What does the UI look like? It will have a text field, it will have a date picker, and it will have a button and a label. So 4 elements. So first, let's drag in a UI date picker. We go to the library. Yes, question?
I have an issue. My current event isn't looking like that. It's looking smaller.
If it's smaller, it's fine because you haven't done large titles. We did large titles by clicking on the navigation controller bar and selecting prefers large titles. Let's drag in a UI date picker first and set the constraints. So click on my library and let's search for date. There's only one date element, so you could simply type in date. Do we all see a date picker? So this is part of the element we're working on today. That's the first time we've seen date picker. Date picker allows the user to select a date. We've all had some wheel where we selected a calendar event, right? This is the date picker. This is what we'll be using today. It's called UIDatePicker. So we'll drag a UIDatePicker into our first view controller. We'll place it in the center horizontally and vertically here. So we'll use the blue guidelines. We'll set our constraints, only 2 constraints. It knows its height. We don't have to set the height. It knows the width of the device. We don't have to set the width of the device. We only set in the center, X and Y, so horizontal and vertical. So we'll click on Align button. We'll click on the Align button down in the constraints area. I'll click on the Align button. I'll select horizontally in container and vertically centered in container. 2 constraints for the picker. 2 constraints for the picker. I'll add the 2 constraints. At this point, I have my picker. Again, I'll run my application to verify that my picker does work. It is showing. Command R to run my app. So I do have the picker. It defaults to, the picker, if we look closely, the picker defaults to the current time and the current day. It's today. Everybody? That's the default value of my date picker property. The date is today's date. The time is the current time. Okay? We could select a day past today, right? We could select a day in the future. Can we all scroll our picker, our date picker? Let's see some properties we have on the date picker. If we click on the date picker and we go to the attributes inspector, the date picker has a mode. A mode, I could show date and time. Currently, we're showing date and time, correct? I could show date, I could show time by themselves. It's up to us on the UI, okay? It's up to us and the designer what we show. The locale here, the locale is the default, right? Locale meaning my current environment, right? It's English, right? And we're Eastern Standard Time, so this is the locale here. Interval, how many minutes you want to go up. Very similar to a stepper, what interval you want to increase the picker by. Again, we have current date here. This is the current date. It's up to you what default date you want. You could have an next default date. Maybe you start in the future somewhere. You could have a minimum date. The minimum date will set in code, right? The minimum date, do we see minimum date here? We'll set that in code, right? We'll set the minimum date such that the user cannot make an event in the past. Everybody with me? Right? Our app doesn't make quite sense if we make an event in the past. Our event either is the current time or future. Okay? So those are the properties we have here. Again, everything you could do in Interface Builder, you could do in code. And most times, code is more flexible. There's more you could do in there. So now, this is good. Our next element, we'll drag in a text field over our date picker. So I will go to my library and I'll search for TextField. I'll drag a text field right above my blue guideline. I'll use my blue guideline on my picker view, right? I'll make sure the bottom is the top of the picker view. I will drag my trailing edge of my text field to the blue guideline, to the margin blue guideline on the trailing view, super view. I'll also drag my leading text field to the leading super view's margin. Okay? So let's go ahead and set the constraints for the text view. The text field, sorry. Text field. We have a text field, correct? Okay. So the text field, let's set the constraints for it. I will click on my Add New Constraints. I'll click on the Add New Constraints button. For my text field, I'll go with the defaults we have right now. 20 to the leading, 20 to the trailing, 8 points from the bottom or from the top of the picker view. This 8 here signifies the closest neighbor, spacing to nearest neighbor. The nearest neighbor is the picker view, okay? So I'll select 8 points here, 20 points from the leading, 20 points from the trailing. Right? Only 3 constraints we need here, and I'll click 3 constraints. The text field has a default height, so you don't need to set the height. All right, for the text field, we'll set some attributes on it. So click the text field, and let's go to the attributes inspector. We'll set a placeholder text, and we'll center align the text field. So we'll center align, and we'll set a placeholder text. Placeholder text will simply say create event. So click on my text field. Let's go to attributes inspector. Firstly, alignment will be center. And I will set my placeholder text. Placeholder text here will simply say create event. So placeholder text says create event. Make sure to press enter. So placeholder text says create event, alignment is center, and we'll increase our font. We'll increase our font to 24. Do we all see where it says font? Do we all see where it says font 14.0? Tiffany, do you see where it says font 14.0? Right above the alignment, there's dynamic type. Do we see where it says font here? Do we all see font? Increase it to 24. So to increase it to 24, I could either use the up-down arrow to go up. I could press up here. Just go to 24. So 24 points for the font size. Okay? Cool. So this is good. Let's see what that looks like. Great. So we have our create event. I'll run my app. Again, run regularly. I'll run my app. I have create event. Can I edit anything? I click into my text field. Let me get my keyboard going. How do we get the keyboard again? Right? So we do Shift Command K to get the keyboard. To toggle the keyboard up, Shift Command K. To toggle it back down, Shift Command K again. Okay? So here we could edit our key, our text field, great, great, great. We click on the return, our keyboard does not get dismissed. Right? So we need to fix that. How do we fix that? How do we make our return key dismiss the keyboard? Cassandra. Cassandra. So Cassandra says we'll use an extension on our view controller and we'll conform to what? And we'll conform to UI TextField delegate and which method gets called when the user clicks on the return. Yes, sir. Should return. TextField should return. The method you need to implement is TextField should return. And what method do we use on the TextField to dismiss the keyboard? Tanya says resign first responder, right? So there's a few steps there, right? We'll need to do, but we won't get to it. Let's keep working on our UI. Everybody? Anybody has a question about what we just said? Why don't we what? You could use the return key button, but we have to get used to using the delegate methods and know what they are. Okay. So, Majid, any questions so far? Cool. Okay, so let's keep working on our UI. We have our text field, we have our date picker. Let's go ahead and drag in a button, a UI button, not a bar button item. The bar button item, where does it go? Chelsea, where does the bar button item go? What's that? A bar button item goes in the navigation bar, right? Or the toolbar at the bottom. Either it goes at the bottom or the top. All right, cool. So it has to be in a bar. It cannot just be standalone. Standalone, we use a UI button. So go ahead and get a UI button here, and we'll drag it right below our date picker here, and let's set constraints for it. First off, edit it to say create event. So double click on the title of the button. Double click on the title of the button and edit it to say create event. And let's go ahead and set constraints for this. So I click on my button. I'll center it. So I'll center it horizontally. I center my button horizontally. One constraint, just horizontally. Bless you. Right? It's red, meaning it's not complete. It needs to know what's its relationship to my super view. So here I'll click on add new constraints for my button. Add new constraints. I will set it at 40 points to the top. 40 points to the top of the bottom. Well, 40 points to the bottom of the date picker. Okay? So 40 points, I will click add one constraint. And that's it. That's all we need. Because here again, the button knows its size because it has content in there. Right? It has a create event text that knows its size, its width, and its height. So we don't have to set that. Only thing we set in is the top constraint and the horizontal alignment. The vertical alignment, sorry. The top constraint, you click on the button, you go to add new constraint, and you edit only the top. Make sure you click on the red I-beam for the top and add one constraint. You're welcome. Cool. So we have our create event button. To the date picker. That's the 40 points. Vertically aligned. Right? Next, let's get a label. So get a, I'm sorry? Because they have contents in them. Exactly, intrinsic size. As to opposed to a UI view, it doesn't have any contents in it, so it doesn't know how to size itself. A label does, because it has that text in there. All right, cool. So, and also a text field knows its height. We don't have to set the height. All right, it has a default height. I think it's like 30 or whatever, that number. So click on the object library, and we are getting a label. So get a label from the object library. Drag in a label right below our create event. Our label will say RSVP no. That's the default. Right? RSVP no, it's a label. And we'll click on add new constraints. Actually, let's do the alignment first. So alignment, very similar to our button. What alignment are we going to use? I want to constrain my label. How am I constraining it? Horizontally, according to Christian here, right? So we'll center it horizontally, and we'll add one constraint. What's the missing constraint? Anybody else? What's the missing constraint on our label? Lydia. Very good. So Lilia says, my last constraint, my label should be aligned with the bottom of the button. Do we agree? Excellent. So what we do, go ahead, Chelsea. Horizontally is left to right. Horizontally is left to right of the device. I want to center it left to right. What does that mean? Center it here. That's horizontally, left to right, or leading to trailing of the superview. If vertically, the date picker is vertically aligned and horizontally aligned. It's directly center of the device, right? One of the best practices is figure out what's your anchor view. Like, where do you want to begin setting your constraints? With ours, we said, let's make the picker view the center, and then everything else is really in relation to that picker view. It's a label. Yes. You could visualize a button. It has that blue default text, and the label has a dark default text. Cool? All right, so here we have we're missing one alignment. So Lilia says to set the top of it. So to set the top of it, we will go to our constraints area. We'll click on add new constraints. No. Yeah, so we'll click on the top of the RSVP no, right? Only one top constraint. So far, so good? We set it to the default of 8, and we add one constraint. And Tiffany says RSVP no. No.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, cool. So our UI for our first view controller is pretty much done. Yes, sir. We did that for let's see, I might be getting it as well. Maybe we have too many constraints. Let's see. Unreachable, no, I don't have it. We're all good here. So for the text field, we have 20 to the lead-in, 20 to the trailing. You could click on your warning and see what's missing. The only thing for RSVP no we set was the top and center. Center horizontally and the top. That's it. Okay, cool. Align. Click on the align button for the label and align horizontally. Yes? Only 2 warnings because we're not done with the view controller, the second view controller. It says it's unreachable because it doesn't have an ID. Okay, very good. All right, so let's go to our second view controller and set up the UI for that. Any questions? So far, so good? Any questions? Our UI is good for our first view controller? Okay, let's move to our second view controller and set up the UI for it. So here we'll drag in a label. Let's get a label. Constraints will be part of the assessment, setting constraints correctly and making sure it renders correctly on an iPhone 4S and an iPad. Okay, everybody? So I would spend like the first part of the assessment getting my UI correct. Like what we're doing today, do the same thing for Friday. Not tomorrow. What's that? Yes. That's what like right now, that's what I'm saying. For this particular project, do the auto layout first. The Game of Thrones, you have your time, you could go whichever way you want. But if you time constrained, right, no pun there, I'll do the UI first and then do the code. Only for Unit 2. As we go into more complex applications, you want to get data first, right? Because data is the bulk of the project. Everybody with me? Cool? It depends on the complexity of the project. And it depends on you too. Some people are better with just like jump into the code, go back to the UI, no problem. But if UI is your weakness, really do the UI first in that particular one because we're assessing UI as well. How good are your constraints? Right? Everybody with me? Okay, cool. All right, so this one, we'll use the label here. My label, I'll edit it to say, are you going? And this one is going to be centered vertical. This is horizontally, right, Chelsea? So this here, left to right, is horizontally centered. So I want it to be here. And vertically is up and down. Okay? So to align it vertically and horizontally, where do I go, Shania? What button do I go to in my constraints area? So the align button, right? Okay, so I go to the align button, the first button here. We won't test you on what align button is, right? Again, that's open book. You could Google the thing, right? That's not what we're testing you on. We're testing you on constraints. How do you constrain stuff? But know what align does for like an oral debrief. Like, everybody with me? All right, cool. So here we'll align it horizontally and vertically, and we'll add to constraints. We have our blue lines. This is great. Awesome. Next, we'll grab in a UI switch. The UI switch will be at the bottom of the are you going. So I'll go to my object library. I'll search for switch. It's right here. Thank you. I'll get a UI switch right below our are you going. As we're doing, please do one element at a time. Don't drag in 10 elements, right? You'll overwhelm yourself. You see the UI has 10 elements, one element at a time. Constrain it, drag in the next element, constrain it. Everybody with me? Even as you constraining, push to GitHub. Push to GitHub, because you know if something goes wrong, your computer crashes or whatever, your constraint was working the last time you pushed. Everybody with me? So this is where GitHub really helps you. Your stuff works, push to GitHub. I worked on View Controller 1, constraints are good. Go ahead.
I just wanted to be sure that I was in order to center to align.
Which one? The label.
The label.
Yeah, center horizontally and vertically. That's it. That's all we need because the label knows its size. Yes, Chelsea? When you say you move something, what do you mean? Like if I move that label, I'm not going to drag that label. It's going to break my constraint. So if I do this, it breaks my constraint. You see that? If you want to move it, you edit the constraint. If I want to edit this, I go to the size inspector. I click on edit that particular constraint. I do not move it manually. Okay? I'll show you what that looks like with the UI switch. Okay, let's do the UI switch first, and I'll show you the way to edit a constraint. We've done it before, but you do not move it after you set the constraint. it's going to break the constraint. I'm sorry? It's going to probably render the same on that particular device, but when you go to a next device, it's going to be broken for sure. That's why Xcode allows you to be like, hey, your constraints are broken, it brings it orange. Blue is good, orange is not, red is bad. Cool? But you do not move manually a button element or whatever element you're working on once you set the constraint. You go to size constraint to edit. Very similar when we have an IB outlet. We do not delete our IB outlet in View Controller. We refactor the name. Okay? Cool. Because once you make that commitment, Xcode has it, Interface Builder knows about it. It has that metadata, so you need to edit the metadata using refactor or go to size inspector. Okay. So Matt's question was, once I create a Get repository in Xcode, where do I go to push it to GitHub? That's your question, correct? So for that, we go to the navigation bar or the navigation area, and we click on, you see where it says Source Control Navigator? Matt? Right. So let me zoom back in here. Is your navigation area open? Is your navigation area open? Matt, is your navigation area open? Okay, so click on that second button here. It says Source Control Navigator. You see it here? It says Source Control Navigator. Right by the Project Navigator, click on it. And it brings up a blue, it brings up, one second, I don't have anything yet, so it doesn't bring up anything. But let me create one. So if I create one, let's all create one together, because right now we don't know what Matt is asking. Matt's question was, I'm ready to push to GitHub. I created a local repository. Let's all create a local repository together. We create a local repository together by clicking on source control. Do we all see source control? We click on source control. Do we all see where it says create get repository? We click on create get repository. Do we all have a blue check mark with our project? We click on create. That creates a local repository on my machine. Very similar to get init in terminal, right? Matt's question is, now I've done that, where do I go to push it to GitHub? Or where do I go to create that remote repository? Remote repository means remotely it's on the cloud, it's on github.com. How do I create a repository on github.com? For that, we make sure our navigation area is open. The navigation area is the left panel, the left column of Xcode. Our project navigator is the first blue folder that we have here. Do we see the first blue folder? This is the project navigator. The second button here is the source control navigator. Source control meaning GitHub ready. That's where you do your GitHub pushes and your changes and your branch configurations. So this is the source control navigator, everybody. I did not have a folder before because I did not have a repo. Now I said create repo. I have a DatePicker repository. Everybody? Now, when I'm ready to create my repository, I right-click on the DatePicker project. Do we all see Create DatePicker Remote? So we click on Create DatePicker Remote. It brings up a dialog, so we could edit our configurations. So here, my name is my name, owner is my owner. The name of my repository, I'll keep the same as the project, DatePicker. For the description, I could give you the description using UIDatePicker date formatter and Unwind Segue to create a date event app. Visibility, I'll keep it public because this is one of the repos I'll share with us at the end of the day to say, hey, this is the project we worked on today. If you were not in, this is the project we worked on today. So you could come back and clone it and work on it. right? When we're ready, when we've edited everything, description is optional, right? But we put a description, we want to know what the thing is. When we're ready, we say create. When we click on create, it pushes to GitHub, right? All in one go. It creates that remote repository, right? GitHub/AlexPaul DatePicker. It creates that URL, and it pushes my code to GitHub. And my commit is initial commit. Everybody? Now, to confirm, we go to our GitHub page. We go to our GitHub page to confirm that our repo has been pushed. We go to our GitHub page, and here I have my DatePicker application. Right? This is my DatePicker application. Cool? Excellent. Now let's go back to Xcode and continue on. Yes? At the end of the lesson, Marjette is asking, at the end of the lesson, I want to push what I've changed. To push what you've changed, you go back to source control, you go to commit, you click on commit, you add in a commit message here where it says enter commit message, and this is going to get blue, that button, and then you click on it. When you finish clicked on it, it closes this dialog box. Then you go back to source control and you push. Cool? Excellent. Good questions. All right. You could try pushing too while we in lecture, like commit push, commit push. Okay, let's keep going. So we have a switch here. Let's set the constraints on our switch. So we'll go to the align button. Align button, sorry. I'll horizontally center it. I'll click on horizontally in container for the switch. It's missing one constraint. I'll add a new constraint horizontally, not vertically. I'll add some padding between my are you going and my switch. I'll make it, what should I make it here? I'll make it 20. So 20, the top of the switch to the bottom of the are you going label, it's 20 points. I add the constraint. All right, so that's my switch. Great. Let's keep going. Yeah, the switch has its size. That's the size recommended by Apple, not bigger than that. You could make a custom switch if you want. Go ahead. Say that again. The RSVP, this is 20 points from the padding between the switch and the bottom of the label. We made it 8 as we could change the numbers based on the designer. Those numbers you'll get from a designer. If you're making your own app, it's up to you to figure out, like we're making our own app, it's up to us to figure out what spacing we want between the elements. The industry standard, the 8 is the default from Apple. 8 is the minimum padding you should have. And then with margins, it's more, it goes between 16 and 20. Cool? Yes?
When you create a constraint, does it by default constraint into the closest object? And is it a best practice?
Most likely you'll get, sometimes it tries to go beyond that, but correctly it will go to the closest neighbor. It will go to the closest neighbor.
Yeah, so it's best practice to
Always go to your closest neighbor, yeah. So David's question was, is it best practice to constrain to your closest neighbor? The answer is yes, right? I'm closer to Jahid. I want to constrain myself to Jahid, not Antonio, who's further away. Cool? Because Jahid moves, I move along with him. For example, if you're doing an animation, I would animate based on Jahid. Cool? All right, let's keep going here. We're dragging 2 labels. Let's drag in 2 labels and a button, and we'll constrain them. So drag in a 1 label, and then we'll copy that 1 label. So I have a label here. I know we said to do 1 at a time, but we're getting more used to this. I have 2 labels, and I'm going to drag in a button. Cool. Let's zoom in here. So my button, I'll edit it to say submit double click, submit, RSVP. We'll set the constraints later. And here for that label, I'll say date of event. And for our final label, I'll say the event is set for. Cool. So let's set the constraints for submit RSVP. This one is going to be centered horizontally, and the top of it will be constrained to the bottom of the switch. We'll use 40 points from the bottom of the switch to the top of the label, of the button, sorry. This is going to be 40, and it's centered horizontally, okay? For the date of event will have it 40 points between the bottom of date of event and the top of are you going? And for the last, the event is set will be 8 points from the bottom of the event to the top of date of event, and we'll make it center, okay? So those are what we're working on. Not all of them are 40. The closest ones, like those are basically siblings. So those are going to be closer, like 8 between each other. And then we'll make it 40 between the date of event and are you going? Cool. Let's do it together so that we all doing the same thing. Let's do the submit RSVP first. Submit RSVP first. I will go to the align button. Align button. I'll click on horizontally in container for my submit RSVP. Horizontally in container, add one constraint. I'll add new constraints. We said we'll make it 40 points, right? So 40 points from the bottom of the switch. At this point, our button is good, our switch is good, are you going label is good, right? So 3 of the constraints are ready. They're good to go. Next up, we'll go to date of event. I'll select date of event. I'll select on align button. I will select horizontally center. I will add one constraint. I'll select my add new constraints. And we said we'll make it 40 points from the top of the are you going button. So 40 points here, 40. Oh, sorry. Where am I? So the bottom of the date of event to the top of are you going? Wait, what am I? Oh, sorry. Thank you, guys. Thanks. Thank you. That's why I got to talk out loud. All right. This is what we need. Cool? Add this. Great. And lastly, we'll say the events is for. We'll set it horizontally centered. Horizontally centered. Add one constraint. And how many points from the top of date of event?
40.
We'll make it 8.
8. Why 8?
So visually, it looks like they're together. All right? Yeah, 8 on the bottom of this one to the top of the date of event. 8 points, right? And let's edit the attributes for the date of event. We'll make it bold and we'll set it to 24 points. So make it bold and make it set it to 24 points. So go to Attribute Inspector. For the event is set for, Attribute Inspector. Attribute Inspector. For the font, we'll go up to 24. For the font for the event is set for, we'll go up to 24. I'll click on, do we see where it says T in a square bracket, in a square box? Do we see the T here? That's text font, right? So we click on the text font and we change it to bold. So click on it. Do we see where it says style? Do we see where it says font style is regular? There's many font styles. One of them is bold. Do we see the font styles here? Everybody, feel free to play with the font styles. Again, Xcode, that's your playground, right? We don't give you font-specific attributes, but feel free to play. Feel free to design your own application. Make it your own personal app, right? So here I'll say bold, right? And our font becomes bold. So far, so good? And again, anything we do in Interface Builder, we could do in code, Okay? So let's keep going here. Great, great, great. At this point, our UI is pretty much done. What we need to do now is create a class for our second view controller, create a class for it, and add outlets to our view controllers. Yes? Yes. So with that, we will stop here for now. We'll take a short break and we'll come back to continue.